year is 2000. With the success of Ocarina of Time, a follow-up was inevitable. By setting it in an alternate universe Hyrule, assets were able to be reused and it took a small team nearly a year to finish. This game would become known as The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. It expanded enough that it actually required the expansion pack, and personally it's near the top of my favorite Zelda games, if not number one. 15 years later, following the success of Ocarina of Time on the 3DS, history has repeated itself and it's followed up with Majora's Mask 3D. While Ocarina of Time 3D was a very good and faithful adaptation, how does Majora's Mask's remake hold up? Find out on this episode of V Gaming Junkie! For the most part, the gameplay has been left intact, of course. Majora's Mask was known as an action-adventure game that took place on a 3-day time cycle and used transformation masks as its primary gimmick, and the same holds true here. It also essentially uses the same control system as Ocarina of Time 3D, with 2 physical buttons and 2 touchscreen buttons for items. One interesting little addition is that the second analog stick, made possible with the Circle Pad Pro or the new 3DS, is used to be able to move the camera independently of moving. A number of other changes exist from the N64 version, unfortunately for better and worse. Just to prove I'm not a complete cynic, I'll start with what I liked first. Rather than being temporary saves, the owl statues now create a permanent save. Some might not like that, but I thought it was a nice little addition. There's also a different type of statue added to certain spots, like the start of dungeons, which is a nice touch. The Song of Double Time was limited to going from day to night and vice versa in the N64 version, but here you can skip to any hour you want. This really helps to reduce the amount of waiting you have to do for certain time-sensitive events. A couple of fishing spots have also been added, and while some aren't really a big fan of the fishing, it's completely optional here. You can even equip the Fierce Deity mask in them. It doesn't really do any good because you can't leave with it and you can't draw your sword, but it's kinda neat. Deku Link's bubble attack has also been modified to have a crosshair and move in a straighter path, in addition to being able to have a reticle beneath you for aiming Deku nuts below you. The bank has also been moved from West Clock Town to behind Clock Tower, which is kinda nice to have if you want to withdraw in a hurry right after using the Song of Time. The second Skulltula quest in Great Bay can now be completed at any time to get the wallet upgrade, and while purists might not like this, you can still self-impose your own challenge to get it done in time if you really want. The owl also teaches you the Song of Soaring at the start of the swamp rather than on the way to Woodfall, so you have the option to fast travel much sooner. A lot of these changes are pretty much quality of life improvements, but now we get to the stuff that was not so good. The most noteworthy of the changes is they completely gimped Zora Link's swimming. Rather than spring forward like a dolphin that actually made swimming a lot more fun in this game than any other Zelda game, they now have Zora Link swim like pretty much every other Zelda game. The speedy swim is technically still there, but now you have to use the magic barrier, which of course drains your magic. Now that alone would be a pretty stupid design choice, but they made it even worse by moving Shiro the Invisible Guard into the Pirate Fortress. The issue is that you need the Lens of Truth to actually see him, which requires magic. You probably burn through all your magic just swimming there unless you want to traverse through the Great Bay the slow and painful way, or you just happen to pop some Shate Romani. I mean, come on, talk about a big design oversight. Speaking of design oversights, there's a couple of spots in the game that actually require you to move at high speeds. Namely, the Beaver Race and the Zora Moon Dungeon come to mind. Granted, they're technically optional, but you need to finish them to get an empty bottle and the Fierce Deity mask respectively. Nintendo's half-baked solution was simply to throw magic jars everywhere. Thankfully, it wasn't so much a problem for me personally because I was able to use a cheat device code to fix the swimming to be fast like it's supposed to be. What Nintendo should have done was either make slow swimming tapping A or use some kind of other button to switch between fast and slow swimming. In addition, Deku Link's acceleration seems to have been altered in such a way that unfortunately makes traversing lily pads a lot more difficult than in the original. That's pretty damn ironic considering many of the changes in this remake were designed to make the game easier. All 4 of the main bosses have also been changed to varying degrees. The least intrusive is God, since you're still meant to ram him with Goron Link like in the original. The difference is that now there's an eye weak spot that you have to transform into regular Link and fire on to deal damage. I'm okay with this one. It's mostly the same, it just adds an extra layer to the fight, but the other 3 are much more significantly changed and all for the worse in my opinion. I'm just gonna say it, Ottawa is a freaking joke in this version. In the original, you were able to harm him with anything and could experiment, which to me meant rushing him with the sword and blocking him every so often. Here, however, you're required to use Deku Link and the Deku Flowers to stun him with Deku Nuts, where you then attack his weak spot when he's down. The problem with that is that if you know what you're supposed to do, the fight is basically impossible to lose. When I fought him, I was surprised because he stood still for basically the entire fight. It was absurdly easy. Gaiorg now has two separate phases. In the first phase, you have to shoot an eye in its mouth with a bow and arrow to damage it. What is it with this remake and giving all of the bosses giant eye weak spots? It was an interesting idea the first time, but then it just drags on and becomes formulaic. After you inflict enough damage, he sinks the platform and now you have to Azor Link time it attempting to suck you up to use the boomerang on the spikes around to have him suck one of them into him. This made the fight ridiculously convoluted, as it was basically up to pure luck as to when it will decide to use the suck attack. Twin Mold, of course, got hit the worst. The first phase of the fight was actually pretty okay, mind you. The blue one is pretty much passive while the red one is trying to hit you. You have to fire arrows at the blue one's eyes to send it to the ground and, surprise, surprise, reveal a giant eye weak spot. After you defeat the blue one, it reveals a chest with a giant's mask in it. Now, if you want my opinion, from here they should have made it like the original, and I would have been just fine with it. An extra step to the process, finish off the red one as Giant Link slashing it with a sword, pretty awesome idea. The fact that this is in the negatives means that that isn't what actually happens. Nope, now you have to stun Twin Mold with your fists as he flies around, because I guess Link's sword now didn't grow up with him or something. What makes things even better is that if he buries himself, the counter to stun him is reset. Shate Romani was absolutely necessary for me to get through this fight, due to the Giant's Mask draining your magic at a pretty fast rate. When he's down for the count, Link starts twirling him, which you can speed up by spinning the analog stick, and proceeds to slam him against the ground to damage the eye. You have to do this at least a few times. Granted, there are a couple of boulders you can throw at him to stun him immediately, but you'll have to do at least one go around just swinging at him, which was really frustrating. Another little annoying thing in the game is that the ice arrow now only freezes in very specific places, as in blue Octoroks and sparkly sections of water. The unfortunate side effect of this is that now not only are you discouraged from being creative, but it basically spells out to you where you're supposed to fire, even when it comes to finding fairies. No more looking around, now you just look for the sparkling water and you know exactly where you're supposed to go. I should also mention that the bombers also come up to you from time to tell you about rumors. The idea is sound because it can be useful for things like heart pieces not attached to NPC quests, but it can also be quite annoying because they seek you out rather than the other way around. If you had to walk up to them and talk to them for the rumors, I think it could have worked. I did mention the owl statues being a positive, but one unfortunate side effect is that the Song of Time no longer saves your game. This makes absolutely no sense to me. Why not keep that aspect while also having the statues permanently save? At least then it wouldn't be mandatory and purists could always just play it the way they wanted to. This next little criticism is sort of subjective, but I really dislike how they changed the Garo mask to look like their leader's mask. While this might make more sense, I don't really like it, because the regular Garo mask is black and makes him look more like an actual ninja, which also makes sense for the Gorman brothers to wear. It looks a little silly for them to be chasing after you in Crimea with freaking golden shiny masks. Not to mention anyone could don a black hood, but it probably makes it more obvious where they came from. Another change that I'm aware of is that there's now a new Gorman Brothers quest to replace the Dante digging up graves for one of the empty bottles, the Dante quest now giving you a heart piece instead. Basically, the Gorman brother in town has fallen ill. I can't imagine why that would be. Glug glug, and you have to get some mystery milk from his brothers in the ranch to him before it expires. After which, he'll let you keep the empty bottle it was in, and it was a pretty nice short quest, probably less tedious than the Dante one, although you still actually need to do that one if you want a heart piece. Ultimately, it's still Majora's Mask, and it's still a very fun game. When I wasn't being frustrated by the little changes, I remembered why I loved this game so much in the first place. To describe the gameplay, it would be like having your favorite food dish in front of you, but there's a persistent bitter aftertaste to the whole thing. Ultimately, I would say it's inferior to the original from a gameplay perspective, although the community efforts have fixed the swimming and are currently working on other things, so it might reach the point of being better in the future. For obvious reasons, plot stands as the least affected element in the remake. Just about everything here is present and accounted for, aside from the aforementioned Gorman Brothers quest and some very minor things like being given the Bomber's Notebook by the Happy Mask Salesman. Thankfully, while the game is a little compromised from a gameplay perspective, it still remains very dark and morbid. For those of you who aren't already familiar with the Majora's Mask story, it starts out pretty simple, Link essentially being hijacked of his ocarina and horse by Skull Kid and his two fairies. The game implies that he was looking for Navi, but now he has to give chase, but the Skull Kid is clearly being empowered by the mask he's wearing, as he has the ability to curse Link into a Deku Scrub. The Happy Mask Salesman seeks out Link's help, wishing to get his mask back, and offering Link to change back to his original form if he can get back the ocarina that was stolen from him. With the help of the Great Fairy and the elderly man in the observatory, Link makes a deal with a business scrub to make it a clock tower top where he confronts Skull Kid. Skull Kid proves to be too powerful for you, but Link does manage to get his ocarina back and hightail it out of there with a Song of Time. The happy salesman teaches Link the Song of Healing and returns to his original form, but is not so happy that he couldn't get the mask back. Basically, under the mask's dark influence, Skull Kid intends to crash the creepy-looking moon and determine how to completely wipe it out. That's definitely a lot darker than previous villains who merely wish to conquer the land. He flat out wants to kill everyone. Link must travel to the four main lands and free the giants to get their help in stopping the Skull Kid, and his first stop is in the swamp, where he rescues one of the two witches who were evil in Ocarina of Time but are now benevolent here. Getting a swamp right, he makes it to the Deku Palace where the king is planning to boil a monkey alive for being accused of kidnapping the princess. I'm not kidding, you can even see the monkey being dipped into the pot later on. I wasn't kidding when I said the game was very dark and morbid. Luckily, before that happens, the monkey teaches Link the Sonnet of Awakening that he can use to get into the Woodfall Temple and defeat Ottawa to save the princess. When he takes her back to the king, she flat out slams him and orders the monkey to be freed. All it seems well, the first giant is freed in the process, and now Link must move on to Goron Village in Snowhead. The place is trapped in a blizzard, and Darmani, the Goron savior, was killed in the process, so there's not too much hope to go around. Link acquires the Lens of Truth and heals Darmani's soul, allowing him to gain the Goron mask to take on Darmani's form. After thawing out the village elder to learn part of the Goron melody, he takes to the elder's son who teaches him the rest of it. With hope now restored to the Gorons as their savior seemingly reappeared, Link makes it to Snowhead Temple and defeats God, setting the second giant free and restoring Snowhead to spring. Guess we'll just call it Grasshead now. Link is able to get a giant bomb to blow up the boulder to Romani Ranch ahead of schedule, at last being reunited with his horse. He makes it to Grey Bay where a dying Mikau asks Link to heal his soul. Link honors his last wishes and his body disappears, leaving behind the mask. Unlike Darmani, Mikau doesn't die until you get there, so the Zoras don't even realize he's gone. It becomes clear that Mikau was fatally injured trying to get into the pirate fortress and save Lulu's eggs that were stolen. Link takes up the mantle and rescues them, in addition to some of the pirates lost in Pinnacle Rock. Taking them to the laboratory, the eggs hatch and teach Link new wave bossa nova that he plays to Lulu, and a giant turtle appears out of the ocean, because why not? Link proceeds into Grey Bay Temple, defeating Gaiorg and releasing the curse in the Grey Bay in addition to the third giant. The fourth area is Ikana Valley, where the game really gets into morbid territory as it's populated by the living dead. After using the Song of Storms to heal one of the Music Brothers' restless spirits, he heals a mummified man to acquire the Gibdo mask and infiltrate the well. After going through a few trades with the local Gibdo population, he gets the Mirror Shield and makes it to Ikana Castle, where he takes on the king and his two men. After defeating them, they're purified, and the king teaches Link the Elegy of Emptiness, and after painfully trudging up the stone tower, he makes it to the temple where he fights Twin Mold and saves the final giant. With all four giants saved, Link uses the Oath of the Order to have the giants stop the moon. However, it's brought to light that the mask was controlling Skull Kid and disposes of him, going inside the moon and empowering it in an attempt to overcome the giants. Making his way inside of the moon to take care of Majora once and for all, Link discovers that it's a big meadow with 5 kids, one wearing each of the boss's masks and one wearing Majora's mask. Link can confront Majora straight away, or play with the 4 other children if he has all of the masks and give them all of the masks. Choosing to do this will net you the Fierce Deity mask. Either way, Link has to face Majora and kill it, which also destroys the moon, strangely enough. Either way, the day is saved and the Happy Mask salesman takes the presumably now dead Majora's mask to make his leave. Link continues his journey to go find Navi. So the story is basically unchanged from the original. It's still the most interesting story in the Zelda series in my humble little opinion. It maintains the darkness and dread all throughout, and it's very refreshing to see. That isn't a real reason to play this over the N64 original though, since it's basically the same exact story. But that's still a thumbs up in the game's favor. Now, presentation might be the strongest argument in favor of playing this version of the N64 original. As expected, the visuals take a pretty sharp improvement over its original counterpart. The models are very nicely improved, and the textures, while a little bit low res due to the 3DS's small 128 megabytes of RAM, is still a vast improvement over the original's very muddy textures. I would say it even holds up perfectly fine in 720p, making it a shame that the 3DS is limited to a measly 240p. It can be easy to not realize just how much better it looks if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, but a comparison really makes it clear as day. The environments especially have generally a lot more detail added to them in certain places, making them seem a lot more lived in. Perhaps the one most obvious change is the lighting system, in that the 3DS version actually has one. While the original perhaps understandably relied a lot on static, flat lighting, the 3DS version uses much more dynamic light sources that allow much better shading on the character models. Perhaps the single biggest blemish is the moon's expression, in my opinion. That may sound silly, but in the original it looked like a mesh of many different emotions. You could even interpret it as straight up fear, like the moon's afraid of falling. The new one has more of a snarl to it, I guess to look more evil, but it loses a bit of the charm in the way. The game also doesn't quite improve certain aspects as well as I would have liked. The most noticeable that sticks out to me is that stair surfaces that were represented by slopes in the original are still slopes here, even though the 3DS is obviously capable of pushing many more polygons. It just really sticks out when you compare it to the rest of the visuals that were actually nicely upgraded. Sound effects and music are simply fine in my opinion. You might notice some differences if you really pay attention, but I didn't really notice anything too drastic. There's not too much I can say on a presentation standpoint, other than that it's a nice polish over the original in terms of raw visuals. It also helps that none of the more disturbing aspects of Majora's Mask are really censored either, and if anything, they're given an even more disturbing light with the improved visuals. In this one aspect, the 3DS version definitely stands as the superior option. Overall, I'd have to say the 3DS version falls short of the N64 version. While the graphics are nicely improved, I have to judge it as a game rather than a movie, and the gameplay shortcomings, at least to me, really bogged down the experience. It's like Nintendo couldn't even decide if they wanted to make the game easier or harder to play, so just mishmash things that seem to do both at the same time. As I mentioned before though, the community is attempting to fix many of the 3DS version's shortcomings. With access to homebrew and some time, perhaps the 3DS version will become a better game, but as it stands, I'd still recommend the N64 version over this. Still, if you absolutely have to get the 3DS version, it's still a very fun game. That is it for my review of Majora's Mask 3D. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.